Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So let's begin by talking about Saturday's attack on and around London Bridge. Police investigating the latest terrorist incident to affect the UK say they know the identity of the three attackers who murdered 7 and injured 48, and say they will release the names as soon as operationally possible. They were shot and killed by police after driving into pedestrians on the bridge in central London and stabbing people in nearby Borough Market. And the names of some of the victims have also begun to emerge today. Let's get the latest on this ongoing investigation from our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Samford. Daniel, tell us the latest developments.
Well, as you say, the police are almost certain now of the identities of the men who drove across the bridge and then started stabbing people in the pubs and restaurants nearby in Borough Market. We in the media are also aware of the identity of at least one of those, but we're being asked by the police to not broadcast them for operational reasons at the moment. I think we may get the names being officially announced as early as this afternoon, but I think that does depend on what happens in terms of arrests and raids over the next few hours. One of the men is definitely a Pakistani man who was living in the Barking area, and another man we're hearing from Irish sources likely had an Irish identity card, and he was of Moroccan origin, but we'll hear more about that in the afternoon. 11 people are currently in custody, 12 having been arrested, but one of the men was released soon afterwards. Most of those people were arrested at one address in Barking and another one close by. We've had 2 fresh raids overnight, one in the borough of Barking and one in the borough of Newham. We've got camera crews at both of those, and there's a lot of police activity at both of those. But still, of course, this is early days. The police pretty much know who did it. The question is, who helped them?
Now, we now know 5 plots have been disrupted between the Manchester attack a few weeks ago and that on Saturday night. Has the volume always been that high?
No, I don't think it has. It has been exceptionally high since 2014. We're talking about 18 plots, I think, since 2014 that have been disrupted. But there does seem to have been an acceleration since that Westminster attack on March the 22nd this year. I think there's a feeling in police circles and in security service circles that there's a degree of copycat or sort of inspiration as a result of that. They noticed how much attention and how much shock was caused by that attack on March the 22nd, and that's encouraged people to accelerate their own plans. And so you've essentially got, since March the 22nd, 2 successful attacks on the UK and 5 what the police believe were unsuccessful attacks on the UK, and that is, I think, the highest level we've really ever seen. It certainly wasn't the kind of rate at which we saw it in the IRA era, and even in the Al-Qaeda era, we weren't getting them coming at the UK at that kind of rate.
Daniel Samford, thank you. Now, this attack followed hard on the heels of the bombing at a pop concert in Manchester less than 2 weeks ago. Last night, the singer Ariana Grande returned to the city for a benefit concert to remember the victims of that suicide bomb. Let's have a listen.
And I think that the kind of love and unity that you're displaying is the medicine that the world really needs right now. So I want to thank you for being just that. And I want to thank you for coming tonight. I love you so much.
Ariana Grande there at that concert. Your thoughts after yet another terror attack, this time on the streets of London?
Well, horrific attack. I suppose in terms of Manchester, good to see Manchester getting back on its feet and responding with that courage and positivity. I think in terms of London, I mean, I know that area quite well. I used to, when I was early in my career as a trainee lawyer, I worked there and I used to go socialising there, and it's horrific. I would say, as our thoughts are with the families and the victims, obviously, as well, huge credit to the public emergency services, particularly the police, 8 minutes from getting that first call to arriving and decisively dealing with, indeed killing the 3 terrorists involved. And we need to hold our nerve. There's going to be lots of talk about what we should do next, and I know coming on to that. But I do think, as well as politicians, we need to get on with our democracy. We need to protect our democracy, and I think Prime Minister's absolutely right to say we go to the polls on Thursday. We don't let the fanatics get the victory of disrupting our democracy. That would be the gift that they would want most.
Right, and also, as you say, there's been a great show of resilience, and if there was an attempt to disrupt our way of life, people going out enjoying themselves either at a concert or on the streets of London, that tribute concert last night to the victims showed that people aren't afraid. No,
and it's interesting, you know, that's, I think, a really strong message from a young crowd, a young audience, young artists. But actually, I think right across the generations, people be proud that Britain is getting back up off its knees and continuing to do the things that not just we need to do, but we want to do. And I guess as a politician, I'm very keen. I've got a hustings this evening. I won't say where, I know, but I've been at a station this morning. We get on and we show that we will not be cowed.
Thank you. So, what does Saturday's attack mean for Thursday's general election? Well, there are questions for both main parties to answer on their record in dealing with terrorism and how they propose to confront a range of new threats. As Home Secretary, a post she held for 7 years, Theresa May presided over a 22% cut to the police budget in England and Wales. There are now 19,000 fewer police compared to 2010, with the Labour Party accusing the Conservatives of trying to protect the public on the cheap. The government points out that since 2015, the policing budget has been protecting and that funding for counter-terrorism has been increasing in line with inflation. However, with the police monitoring around 3,000 subjects of interest and 3 terror incidents in the last 3 months, Theresa May has been criticised for replacing control orders, which place terror suspects under intense supervision, with what have been described as looser rules. However, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has also come in for criticism after he admitted he'd spent his career opposing key pieces of anti-terror legislation, leaving the Conservatives to claim he can't be trusted with the nation's security. In 2001, Mr Corbyn joined Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell and Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott in voting against putting Al-Qaeda on a government list of proscribed terrorist organisations. 2 years ago, the Labour leader said he wasn't happy over the police shoot-to-kill policy, although last night he said he would take whatever action was necessary and effective to protect the public. Mr Corbyn has also faced uncomfortable questions about his associations with the IRA and members of Hamas, which the UK government considers a terrorist organisation. Well, both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have been criticising each other over this issue. Let's have a look at the Labour leader speaking last night and the Prime Minister speaking at an event this morning.
You cannot protect the public on the cheap. The police and security services must get the resources they need, not 20,000 police cuts. Theresa May was warned by the Police Federation, but she accused them of crying wolf.
Safeguarding the security of our country takes leadership. That's why since 2010, in the face of a growing threat, we've protected the budget for counter-terrorism policing and increased the resources available to the security and intelligence agencies. It's why since 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn's front bench was arguing for the police to be cut by a further 10%, we've not cut the police, but protected their budget.
Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn. I can welcome Jonathan Ashworth now to the Daily Politics. But I'm going to start with Dominic Raab. Labour has accused the Conservatives of doing security on the cheap, and there's evidence for that.
No, I'm afraid if you look at just take the evidence from this terrible attack at London Bridge, within 8 minutes the armed police were there responding decisively and taking out the 3 terrorists. Now, talking about having other ordinary bobbies on the beat is not going to deal with an attack like that. In fact, it would be deeply irresponsible. We've already seen some of the ordinary officers that were involved suffering injuries. What you need to be willing to do is have the armed police, and we're putting 1,500 more armed officers at the service of the country. You need to have them trained and equipped and ultimately willing to take out the terrorists. Right. And I think that really what we've seen from Jeremy Corbyn is an attempt to deflect on all the questions that you've rightly put out in your clip that he needs to answer. Theresa May's been Home Secretary for 6 years, assiduously, vigorously, robustly, but also calmly doing whatever it takes to protect this country from terrorism. Except, of course, police numbers have gone down. Well, she has been Home Secretary, as you say, for 7 years, previously to being the Prime Minister, and we've seen police budgets cut
by a fifth.
But crime down by a third.
But if we're looking at the numbers, and that's what I asked you about, whether there's any truth and evidence to Labour's claim about doing it on the cheap.
But I answered that, didn't I?
Well, you didn't. You said the response time was good and the police have been praised for that. But 19,000 fewer police officers on our streets, 1,000 fewer armed officers ready for deployment.
Joe, you can't
I mean, with the benefit, I know,
No.
with the benefit of hindsight,
Yes.
the benefit of
wrong.
hindsight, do you think the public deserve an apology from the government for cutting numbers?
Joe, this is wrong. This is based on a total misapprehension.
The figures aren't wrong. Let's just be clear.
You're right. There have been difficult decisions on police budgets, but crime has been cut by a third. What you can't somehow pretend is that you're going to send an ordinary Bobby on the beat in to deal with the kind of horrific attack we saw on the weekend. And just to give you an illustration of this,
but these are police numbers I'm talking about, and armed police numbers. You're talking about what
terrorist attack. And what I'm saying is, to deal with a terrorist attack, which is what the issue of the day is, you need to have them armed and authorised to go in and deal with the issue. And I have to say, even the armed officers dealing with people with strapped explosives around their bodies were incredibly brave. You couldn't expect to have ordinary bobbies going in to deal with that. I think what Jeremy Corbyn is talking about here is deflective.
And we're going to come on to that. But let's just be clear on the figures on armed police. Have they fallen, the number of armed police that you are talking about, since 2010?
So my understanding of this is that since 2015, our commitment has been to put in 1,500...
But since 2010, they've fallen, haven't they, the number of armed police officers?
I'm not sure of the headline number off the top. We've tried to protect that. But you heard from let's be clear about this. You've heard from the Met Commissioner, Cressida Dick, that the armed police are properly resourced. What they've also got to be is properly armed and trained and authorised to take the decisive action that they did on Saturday night.
All right, let's go to Jonathan.
More people would be suffering.
I mean, Jonathan Ashworth, we talked briefly there about the response time. The armed police were there in 8 minutes. Otherwise, I'm sure the carnage would have been, well, it would have been much worse. So, in a way, they have got the resources and the numbers that they need. They responded very effectively on Saturday.
Well, they did respond incredibly effectively. And can I just say, because I've not had the chance, because I was a little bit late, that I've got huge praise for the extraordinary and brave response from the police and all the emergency services on Saturday evening. They really do make me proud to be British. But on the broader point, we have seen cuts while Theresa May was the Home Secretary of around 20,000 police officers. On your point on armed police, they've been cut by 1,000 under Theresa May.
Since 2010?
Since 2010. Right, since 2010, cut by 1,000. A lot of the security agencies have seen their budget cut while Theresa May was Home Secretary.
1,800 more.
They've been cut since 2010 while Theresa May was the Home Secretary. And the Conservative... Let me finish.
Let Jonathan finish his point.
The Conservative Party have wanted to position this election as a referendum on Theresa May, so it's only fair, therefore, that we scrutinise her record as Home Secretary. And hers is one where 20,000 police officers cut, 1,000 armed police cut, security agencies cut, and I'm not convinced that her whole sort of line about she's going to stand up and make our streets safer, I don't think it's
right.
true.
And you've been asked, the Tories... Well, and I'll let you do that in just a second, because the Tories, you and your colleagues, have always said when they come on this programme, judge us on our record. And we are judging you on this specific record, and also the fact that Theresa May said yesterday, enough was enough, which is a strange phrase, because you might have asked, well, what didn't bother her before that is bothering her now? And on the issue of police numbers, Jeremy Corbyn has gone so far as to say that she should actually resign over the cuts in police numbers. What do you say to that?
So Labour's position in 2015, and we've protected the police budget since 2015, is that we should cut police numbers possibly by up to 10%. So it's rank hypocrisy. On the question of judge us on our record, I think you judge a government, Prime Minister, a team, on what you do in practice. And what we saw on Saturday night in horrific circumstances was an effective armed response. Within 8 minutes, the terrorist's been taken out, because we've got not just the right resources, but also the right leadership and willing to do the difficult things that need to be done in that horrific situation.
Right, and
Jeremy Corbyn has U-turned overnight on the question of shoot to kill.
Let's talk about that. And leadership and practical response is important here, isn't it? People have to know what action is going to be taken and whether they have political support.
Yes.
Do you share your leader's view that there are problems with the current shoot-to-kill policy that the police used on Saturday night?
Well, our leader spoke out last night and made clear that he supports what the police did and would support them taking similar action in a similar set of circumstances in the future.
Right, but he's changed his mind, because let's have a listen to what he said a few years ago on this.
If we saw the kinds of horror in Paris here, if you were Prime Minister, would you order security services onto the street to stop people being killed?
Of course you bring people onto the streets to prevent and ensure there is safety within our society. Much better, that's done by the police and security services, much better. We have strong and effective community policing, neighbourhood policing, and a cohesive society that brings people together. Obviously that is essential, and so that's one of the messages I'll be putting to the Prime Minister.
But if you were Prime Minister, would you be happy to order people, police or military, to shoot to kill on Britain's streets? I'm not happy with the shoot-to-kill policy in general. I think that is quite dangerous, and I think can often be counterproductive. I think you have to have security that prevents people firing off weapons where you can. There are various degrees of doing things, as we know, but the idea you end up with a war on the streets is not a good thing. Surely you have to work to try and prevent these things happening. That's got to be the priority.
So Jeremy Corbyn was not happy with the shoot-to-kill policy that was used to kill the attackers that murdered 7 people in London. So I ask you again, do you agree with him? That's what he said 2 years ago, 3 months after becoming leader. It's quite dangerous and it's counterproductive.
Are you going to show the clip of what he said last night, where he said he supported what the police did?
Yes, and my question then is,
he would support the police
what
taking
should
the action
people
they need to
believe?
take.
Should they believe what he said 2 years ago, because that's obviously how he felt, he was very clear about it, or should they believe what he said last night?
I think people should judge us on what we've said in our manifesto and in this election campaign, which is what Jeremy said in his speech last night, which is that we would support the police in taking the action that they need to take, including what they did last night, to shoot those despicable terrorists who are killing people on our streets.
Right, but the problem is, of course, is this issue of trust. Because last week, Jeremy Corbyn's head of communications, Seamus Milne, was recorded on a train discussing how Jeremy Corbyn should handle questions about Trident renewal and how he should shut down those questions on Trident renewal. This was following one of the election debates. And he said, and I quote, "It's a sort of proxy question, really. So that's why I am always saying I think we should just say we will do whatever is necessary and effective to protect our people." The same line that Jeremy Corbyn used last night, whatever is necessary and effective. Is that just your leader's pat answer to disguise his true views?
No, I mean, our leader has been very clear over many years about his position on nuclear weapons, but the Labour Party's position...
No,
Party of the
I'm
manifesto,
asking you, he's used the same phrase. I don't want to talk about Trident renewal because we know what Jeremy Corbyn's views are about that and he's been consistent. But this line that he was advised to use by his head of communications, a proxy, if you like, a catch-all phrase to say whatever is necessary and effective in an election campaign to reassure people, to disguise his views, when 2 years ago he said he really wasn't happy with the shoot-to-kill policy.
I mean, let me just say, advisors advise leaders all the time on lines. Theresa May will be getting lines from her advisors as well. I've been an advisor to a leader in previous election campaigns.
But he used that line.
Yeah, well, you know,
whatever
that's what advisors advise their leaders to do. I mean, you know, advisors will have advised Dominic on lines.
But why should people believe Jeremy Corbyn? Why should he believe it? Isn't it just because we're in an election? He has to say he would do whatever is necessary and effective. His real views are quite clear. It's quite dangerous and counterproductive.
The Labour Party manifesto that we're putting to the people in this country says we're going to maintain our nuclear deterrent, and of course, if we're going to maintain our nuclear deterrent, we would use it. I mean, nobody wants to be in a position where you have to use it. That would be the most horrible of circumstances ever. But of course, we'll do nothing to compromise the safety of this country. So you won't get us, for example, cutting police by 20,000 or cutting armed police by 1,000, and then going to the police chiefs and telling them they're crying wolf when they complain about it, which is what Terrorism made.
You advocated a 10% cut. You did. Go back and check the record.
We advocated savings.
Hang on, don't talk over each other. Let Dominic make his point and then you can respond.
I already made it. It's rank hypocrisy for them to criticise on this when they said that there would be even more cuts if they'd have been in power. I mean, but look, the bottom line is, and you, Joe, you made the point very clearly, if you got a U-turn on shoot to kill 2 days after a terrorist attack, 3 days before we go to the polls, it just goes straight directly to leadership. And Theresa May has spent 6 years doing whatever it takes to protect this country.
By cutting police by 20,000.
Well, hang on. Can you answer, though, that question, the particular issue about changing one's mind conveniently in the middle of a general election campaign? You have said that people should take what Jeremy Corbyn said last night at face value in terms of giving the resources and the powers to the police to do what he said 2 years ago he was deeply uncomfortable with.
Well, we have said it. We've said it in our manifesto. We believe our manifesto is a contract with the British people, and we ask people to vote for us on Thursday and to judge us on our record. But the record of the Tory party is one of cuts, 20,000 cuts to police and 1,000 less armed police officers on our streets. And whenever anyone's raised those issues with the Prime Minister, she said they were crying wolf.
Right, and just finally, Dominic Raab, if it is about judging your record, and of course Theresa May and the government cannot be blamed directly, but these did happen while the Tories have been in power. These 3 attacks, and the same with Lee Rigby, the murder of Lee Rigby, they have all happened while the Tories have been in power. Are they not accountable?
Well, I don't think we went around saying that 7/7 was the responsibility of Tony Blair, but the raw truth is...
I'm not saying responsible, but they're accountable for it.
No, look, that's what we're doing right now. But the fact of the matter is that you've got to take into account the countless terrorist attacks we foiled, the change in the nature of terrorism to lone wolf attacks and small groups, very difficult to deal with.
But you've made it more difficult by reducing numbers.
No, excuse me. We saw on Saturday night, with actions, not words, with a time where we all know that we've got finite public resources because of the deficit and all of that. We all know that. So we've got to take difficult decisions. And what we've done is make sure our armed police and our armed response is at the very best it could be. And we've got a leader that will do whatever it takes. And in Jeremy Corbyn, whether it's on Trident, shoot to kill,
20,000 less police,
drone strikes on Islamic State, this is a guy that is not prepared to take the difficult decisions to protect us.
Control orders, you got rid of them, didn't you?
And we're going to talk about control orders in just a moment.
David Davis as well, your mate.
Now, it's worth remembering that whereas there have been 3 attacks in the last 3 months, the majority of terrorist plots, as was said, have been prevented by the police and security services. Less than 3 months ago, on Wednesday the 22nd of March, there was a car and knife attack carried out by one individual in Westminster. 5 people were killed. 2 weeks ago, on Monday, the 22nd of May, a suicide bomber blew himself up in the Manchester Arena, killing 22 people. And the London Bridge attack on Saturday has currently claimed the lives of 7 people. However, the Prime Minister said yesterday that the police and the intelligence agencies have disrupted 5 terrorist plots since the Westminster attack in March. And since 2013, the authorities have stopped a total of 18 terrorist plots. And, as we mentioned before, there are around 3,000 people who are currently subjects of interest in terrorism investigations. And there are a further 20,000 individuals who used to be subjects of interest in terrorism investigations. Joining me now to discuss all this is Lord Alex Carlisle, the former independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, and Nazir Afzal, the former chief prosecutor for North West England. Welcome to both of you. Alex Carlisle, first of all, as we've said there, it is worth remembering that the majority of terrorist plots are prevented by the authorities and security services. We now, of course, know there have been 3 attacks in less than 3 months. Do you believe that the police and intelligence agencies have the resources and the powers they need?
I do, and Cressida Dick said so yesterday. The argument about 20,000 community police officers has got nothing to do with terrorism. It's a completely different, if legitimate, argument. But it is absolutely clear to all those who are involved with knowledge in counter-terrorism policing and related issues that the authorities do have the resources they need, and that they have been broadly very successful. They've interdicted 18 plots in the last 3 or so years. But of course, as the Prime Minister said at the speech which I heard just a few minutes ago, we do need to review our policy because of the changing activities of so-called Islamic State.
But are the authorities actually using the powers that they have at their disposal when you look at the legislation? TPIMs, which I know you have been critical of, and these are sort of looser than control orders in terms of trying to monitor suspects, they're in use at the moment, but they've only been used 7 times. And it's also thought that temporary exclusion orders, which can stop jihadists who are coming back from places like Syria, are not being used at all. Why?
Well,
Why not?
I think temporary exclusion orders present some difficulties in their use, and they probably need to be re-examined. But TPIMs have not been used. In 2010-2011, the coalition government decided to get rid of control orders, wrongly. And it was a purely political decision by Nick Clegg. As a result, TPIMs were brought into effect, and they're weaker than control orders. I was the independent reviewer for the whole period that control orders were in force, and I looked at them every single day, and I was a member of the Control Orders Review Group. My belief is that they may well have saved many lives.
Really?
And that, therefore, we should revert to the insertion into TPIMs of all the controls that were available under control orders, because it works.
Right. Dominic, Rob, what do you say to that?
I don't think there's, I mean, I respect Alex's view, and we've talked about this a lot before. I'm not sure there's any evidence that actually that would have made any difference in any recent attacks. And let me just briefly explain why. Firstly, because the problem with control orders is they leaked like a sieve. The abscond rate got a bit better, but was pretty high. Secondly, they were attacked by the courts. And thirdly, if you're really trying to deal with these people that are at a level where you're not quite sure what they're up to, you can't have them permanently on control orders. So, I mean, there's
well,
some
except,
things
of course,
that
Theresa May says now enough is enough and we need to change our approach in terms of dealing with terrorism.
3 days before an election, I'm going to be very careful about this because I think there's a responsible way to go about this. If there's any evidence that we need to look at any of the powers, I'd be willing to do that again. But when I've looked at this in some detail, there's never really been any evidence that control orders could deal with the kind of problem we're now seeing.
So what's your evidence?
I'm not saying that control orders would necessarily have dealt with these individuals. There's no way of knowing.
No.
Control orders, there were no absconds in the last 3 years of control orders. They were very well run. And so far as the courts were concerned, they struck down some aspects of control orders, but the control orders were well within human rights legislation, and I'm telling you, they worked.
But
would you support... Well, I'm just going to...
They were only covering 8 people of around 2,000.
No, they weren't covering 8
well,
people. I'm sorry, Dominic.
So
you're
what
wrong
were they? How
about
many?
that. The highest,
at any one time?
At any one time, the largest number of people controlled was 23.
Yes.
And there was always room for that to be increased. It was envisaged at the beginning there would be more.
Let me go to Nazir Afzal. Just one moment, though. Would you support a return to control orders being?
Yes, I would. I thought it was a huge mistake for the Tory government.
And would Jeremy Corbyn
to get rid of them? But well, Jeremy Corbyn was the same position as Theresa May.
Right. So he wouldn't.
But I would definitely support.
Against control
right.
orders,
OK.
You know,
So now Nazir Afzal. Theresa May made a statement outside Downing Street yesterday. She described 4 areas where more needs to be done. One of those was the internet and technology. Do you agree with her that the internet can provide a safe space for terrorists?
It does. We know it does. I think they've taken down maybe 250,000 websites in the last 2 years. There are tens of thousands replacing them. This work is not just something the British have to do. This is international. We know most websites are centred in San Diego or Los Angeles or California, so it's an international thing that has to happen. But yes, there are individuals who are being radicalised online, as we appreciate. And I think one of the individuals that we're talking about, or maybe talking about in the next day or two, will have been radicalised online. So yes, there is work that needs to happen online, but online is only part of the issue. Most radicalisation takes place within communities, within conversations that are happening in places that aren't the mosque anymore. We tended to focus on the mosque as being a place where people are being radicalised. The reality is that, if anything, it's happening outside of the mosque. It's happening in places that perhaps we don't necessarily have the ability to look into and see what's going on. But we've got to deal with that. I think the Prime Minister is right in the sense of saying more needs to be done, but the reality is that we don't know what more needs to be done. I certainly don't think I can't think of any more legislation. Lord Carlisle will know better than I, but I think we've had 11 terrorism acts since 2000. We've run out of names for them now. And it gets to the point, really, where I can't think of any more legislation. And maybe we now, I think the conversation you were just having a moment ago, need to go back to stuff that we've had before.
Yes.
Well, my point is that the answer to this lies within the communities. And the communities have to have trust, and they need to be engaged with, and they need to be able to trust the people that they're giving the information to. And I think what you may have touched on is that there's been thousands of bits of information coming through. Do the services, security services and the police, have the resources to do more than just risk assess them and act upon them? Well, I'll leave the politicians to debate that.
Right, but that's but that, if you like, is a reaction. Yes, I mean, there have been claims made that people called about the people involved in the last 2 attacks, and they perhaps weren't followed up. I mean, it hasn't been verified in that sense. But if we look at the cause, what you talk about in terms of the communities, I mean, let's look at the PREVENT programme, and that is the government-backed effort to stop people becoming radicalised. It's been criticised by lots of people. Some parts of the Muslim community, the Labour Party has criticised it. What's wrong with it?
My personal view is that it works very well where it works. It is poorly communicated. There's poor engagement within the community. It's misunderstood in many respects. Sometimes, I think I've made the point over the last couple of days, that sometimes deliberately misunderstood by people that wish to undermine it for whatever reason they may wish to undermine it. I don't know. But when it works really, really well. I can think of 1,000 examples. And I think this is the part of the problem, the communication. All you hear about, sadly, are the examples where maybe somebody got it wrong. The reality is that I can think of 1,000 examples where people have been properly worked with, ensure that they don't go off to Syria, for example, in 150 cases, or in other cases they've been given some mental health support or some other career support. So it does work, but it hasn't worked routinely across the board.
But it does work, and you've got examples of where it's worked. So Jonathan Ashworth, why is Labour criticising it so much? I mean, Andy Burnham, the former Labour minister, now Mayor of Greater Manchester, has said the Prevent programme creates division, alienation and a cloud of suspicion hanging over a whole community. And in fact, I think it's Nazir Afzal that says there are just myths peddled about Prevent. Why do you want to drop it or replace it?
Well, because exactly what Nazir has just been saying. In places where it works well.
Right.
In other parts of the country or in other communities, there's suspicion about it. People think it is just there to spy on people, and it hasn't got confidence. Look, I know a lot about
But is that because you've undermined it as a party?
No. I know we can't name constituencies, but the part of the world that I represent and hope to carry on representing, we have Prevent. I know it well. We work with it. And that picture that has just been painted of elements of it working well and being very important, and we need to continue with, is one I absolutely understand and identify with.
Do you think
there are other elements where it doesn't work, and we're saying let's review it and let's involve the community again in Prevent.
Do you think it's been undermined, Prevent?
I agree with every word that Nazir Afzal said. I think it's been undermined deliberately by some people. Prevent, which I've studied...
From within the community,
From within certain communities. I believe, on the evidence that I have seen, and that's quite a lot, that where Prevent works well, it works very, very well. And to say that we should get rid of it and start again is just ludicrous. What we need to do is take the best practice of Prevent and roll it out all over the country with greater funding. This government has promised that funding. I hope that in the future, whatever government...
But it has been cut. It has been cut, of course, in recent times.
The Prevent funding has not been cut. The Prevent funding has been increased consistently. There have been problems with changing strategies towards Prevent, particularly around about 2010-11. But Prevent has been doing well, and other countries come to us asking us how we do it.
The profile of the funding's changed, so...
but it's gone to local authorities.
But
that's been beneficial.
A lot of community groups were getting money to work with young people.
But actually,
and that was cut back.
But Labour's line was that it had been cut.
Yeah, but it's perfectly legitimate to remove funding from one programme and put it into a better programme, and that's been happening all over the country.
But in the part of the world I represent, there'll be complaints that when a lot of the good work they were doing with young men, they've had to scale back because the Prevent money isn't there anymore.
All right, I'm just very briefly, because we literally have run out of time, but Nazir Afzal, when I mention the community, of course, there isn't such a thing, is there, as one, homogenous Muslim community, but just briefly.
The Muslim communities, I mean, in London, they come from 52 different countries. In the north of England, Jonathan knows they come from 2 or 3. So they're very, very disparate, very different, very distinct. The issue I have is that, sadly, the government, and by that I mean everybody, local government as well, is very lazy. It goes to the same community leaders, the usual suspects. You have a meeting, they come. It doesn't go out to the young people. It doesn't go out to the women who are doing phenomenal work in their own communities. And it doesn't fund them and support them in doing what they're doing. And I think we need to change our approach.
Thank you both very much.